Welcome to Working for Women, the Independent Women's Forum podcast, where we are changing the conversation about women and public policy for the better.
Hello, I'm Hadley Heath Manning, Director of Policy at Independent Women's Forum and your host for today's Working for Women podcast. Today I'm here with a very special guest, the Lt Governor of Ohio, Mary Taylor. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So today we're going to be talking about the opioid epidemic, an issue where Lt Governor Taylor has truly been a leader. So why don't we kick off the conversation by talking a little bit about your work on this issue? I know this issue is actually very personal for you. So maybe you could begin by giving our listeners some background on why this issue means so much to you.
Well, sure. This is it's a major issue across our country. Over 60,000 Americans lost their lives because of overdoses. Unfortunately, over 4,000 of them have been in Ohio, just looking at 2016. For me personally, it is personal. Both of my sons are living in recovery today. So I have been through and lived the nightmare that is this drug addiction, opiate heroin epidemic that is sweeping across the state of Ohio. I'm very fortunate that both of my boys are sober today and living in recovery, but I certainly can personally understand the challenges that I know so many families across our state are still dealing with. And of course, I have friends who have lost loved ones as well, and it's devastating. And it not only tears apart families, it destroys dreams, hopes, and dreams. But it's destroying our communities and the very fiber of what makes our state such a great state.
Well, that is very remarkable to hear the story of your family. And of course, on behalf of IWF, our hearts go out to your family and so many families. We know that addiction touches so many lives throughout our country and also in the state where you live and work as Lieutenant Governor. So maybe you can tell our listeners now a little bit more, you mentioned this, but about the scope of the opioid addiction problem in Ohio and what recommendations you have to address it.
So the scope is enormous. When we think about losing in 2016 over 4,000 Ohioans to an accidental overdose because of addiction, it's staggering. And I don't know, we don't have numbers yet, obviously, for 2017. But I just in conversations I've had with medical professionals and law enforcement officers across the state of Ohio, we are still in the throes of this addiction crisis. So my administration will continue to place this as a huge priority. And this administration has been working so hard to combat this drug addiction crisis. Coming into office in 2011, we knew this was going to be a major issue. So we put together a strike force and really started focusing on getting the number of illicit pain pills off the streets. We shut down pill mills. We took license away from doctors who were just writing prescription after prescription with really no accountability for the number of opiates that were being prescribed or the purpose for which they were being prescribed. We stepped up law enforcement efforts. In fact, for 5 years in a row, our state highway patrol has had a record number of seizures of heroin coming across our borders and through the state of Ohio. So we know that stepping up our law enforcement efforts that way has really helped. We have implemented tough regulations so that pain pills that are being written in a prescription for acute pain are restricted and limited to 7 days if you're an adult and 5 days if you're a child. So just really looking at this from every single angle, but we need to continue to focus on, well, two things, I think. Focus on how we get access to quality help, to quality care and rehabilitation for those that find themselves in the throes of addiction. And I'm proposing in Ohio that we put forth a conservative kind of market solution, proposing a bond issue where we will incentivize the private sector to build the continuum of care that we know is necessary in order to have a successful recovery. And that starts with your detoxification period, could be your 30, 60, 90-day intensive inpatient treatment, and then recovery housing or making available what some call sober living, giving these individuals every opportunity that they need in order to get the type of care that they need to be fully successful in the state of Ohio.
That's it. I hope that people who are listening, policymakers and constituents alike, if they hear this IWF podcast, can, learn about and learn from your efforts and your proposals. And we really appreciate your leadership on this issue. We know also it's going to be a team effort, including the federal government. And I know that there are people working on the Presidential Opioid Commission, chaired by Chris Christie, putting together policy recommendations at the federal level to turn the tide against opioid addiction. So recently, President Trump declared the opioid crisis a national public health emergency. And I wanted to ask you, especially as, from your perspective as Lieutenant Governor of Ohio, what does it mean for the federal government to declare this national public health emergency? What does it mean for your state and for other states? And do you think that the Trump administration, is taking the right steps on this issue?
Well, I think it's vitally important to treat this issue as the emergency that it is. I'll just be perfectly honest with you. And since coming into office in 2011, I can tell you this is something that I have taken very seriously, and this administration in Ohio has taken seriously, and we've always treated it like an emergency. And so I welcome a great partnership with President Trump and his administration and his task force that's working to put forth real substantive solutions to help us address this crisis. And I can tell you one of the most important things that I feel they can do from a federal perspective is shut this stuff down at the border. We know that opium is coming across our southern border, and we know that, at least in Ohio, we know that illicit opiates or illicit pain pills, fentanyl, carfentanil, other manufactured very strong opiate-type medications are coming from China. And I'm sure that's the same in other states across the country. And so I welcome having a great partnership and relationship and really welcome the work they're doing in Washington in order to seize this stuff, shut it down at the border, and be willing to work with law enforcement across the country. We think about Ohio, I think about our local law enforcement working better with our state highway patrol, working better with our federal partners in order to have all of the same knowledge about where these drugs are coming from and how to keep them out of our state borders, but also ultimately how do we keep them out of our country in the first place.
Thank you for that answer. This has been a very educational conversation, and I want to extend special thanks to our guest today, Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor of Ohio. We know you're very busy, and we were so glad to catch a few minutes of your time to discuss this very critical topic today. In closing, I also want to plug IWF's work on the opioid crisis. We have a policy focus, a letter we sent to the Opioid Commission, and several other blogs and op-eds and podcasts on our website, iwf.org. So thanks again, Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor, and thanks to our many listeners for tuning in.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, or stop by iwf.org for similar content.